Hey, what up, guys? Doing another What's Next. This is on Jarrett Hurd, former unified super welterweight champion at 154 pounds. He's currently my number 4 super welterweight in the world right now. Hurd returned in January on the Danny Garcia Yvonne Redkoch undercard on Showtime and faced off against veteran Francisco Santana and got a convincing, workmanlike kind of 10-round unanimous decision. He was bouncing back off of when he lost his unified title last year, suffered the first loss of his career to Julian J. Rock Williams. That was by a decision. He was bouncing back. He looked solid against Santana. He hurt him late in the fight. Hurd's he's got a new trainer, so he's implementing a new boxing style, not just coming straight at people and kind of brawling. He's boxing more, so he boxed a little more. He looked decent. Santana's not a good enough opponent to kind of base off of how Hurd's being effective, but he looked like the old Hurd in the last couple rounds when he hurt him and, got walked out with a 10-round decision. Hurd is down to face anybody right now. He's rated number 1 in the WBA. I think he's like number 5 in the WBC right now. He's got the number 3 ranking in the IBF, so he's rated in pretty much every governing body and is trying to get in line for a title shot. So let's run him through the top 10 and see what's next for former unified world champion Jarrett Hurd. We start with number 1, WBC champion Jermell Charlo. I don't see this one. Charlo is looking to add title belts to his resume. He's looking at Erislandy Lara right now. I know unified champion Jason Rosario is an option. Charlo's doesn't have to face Hurd right now. Hurd is high risk and he doesn't bring a belt to the table. Charlo's coming off his career best win, his rematch knockout of Tony Harrison. And, he's the top dog in the division right now. And he doesn't have to face Hurd. So it would be a risky fight to take him on right now. And he wants to face somebody probably less of a risk, and he can add a world title. I don't see this one being possible next. Number 2 is Jason Rosario. Outside chance this can happen. Rosario holds the WBA super belt and the IBF title, the belts that Hurd used to hold. He beat J. Rock Williams. I think Hurd would love to face Rosario, but the problem is Rosario, I believe, has a mandatory due of the IBF belt, and I'm not sure if the IBF's forcing that fight to happen next, but I think the reason that Charlo and Rosario isn't being worked out to unified belts is because Rosario is going to be stripped of the IBF title if he doesn't make a mandatory next. So I think that takes Jarrett Hurd off the table for Rosario, even though he's number 1 to the other belt that Rosario has, the WBA title. So I'm not seeing this fight next. I think it is possible, but I'm not seeing it. Number 3 is a rematch with former unified champ Julian J. Rock Williams. I highly doubt it. I mean, J. Rock wanted the rematch with Jarrett Hurd. Hurd passed on it. And then J. Rock went and got knocked out against Rosario. So would he want to face Hurd in his first fight back? I guess it's possible. They're both with the PBC, but I don't think it's likely. Williams passed on a mandatory rematch with Rosario the way Hurd passed on a rematch with him. So I don't think these two guys are going to get together next in a rematch. Hurd is number 4. Number 5 is a rematch with WBA regular champion Erislandy Lara. Lara looks to be trying to work out a deal with Charlo to unify belts, but if that didn't happen, I think Lara would be down for a rematch. He narrowly lost to Jarrett Hurd. He's always looking for big fights. Hurd is the number 1 ranked contender in the WBA, so the WBA could mandate this fight to happen. But I think Lara is going to work out a deal with Charlo next. I think that's going to happen. The fact that Charlo is interested at all, to me, says that fight's going to happen. But I'm surprised because Lara, I thought, was going to have to make a mandatory against WBA gold champion Michel Soro of France. So I'm kind of surprised they're not implementing that or mandating Lara to defend that title at all. But, the WBA is a corrupt organization. They don't make a lot of guys mandate. Sometimes that works out for the fans' benefit, though, because it leaves them open to make more optional defenses, and unification bouts are optional defenses. So Lara's looking at unifying with Charlo. I think that's going to happen, so I don't think that makes a rematch with Hurd possible. Next is number 6, the undefeated Brian Castaño. Not seeing this one. Castaño is in line to fight Patrick Teixeira for the WBO title next, so he's not going to be facing Hurd. Number 7 is a rematch with former world champion Tony Harrison. I don't see this one. Harrison's coming off the knockout loss to Charlo. I don't think he'd want to try to get revenge off of another guy that knocked him out in Jarrett Hurd. They fought back in 2017 for the vacant IBF title. Hurd stopped Harrison to capture that belt, and it was a good fight. Stopped him in 9, but for Harrison to take on Hurd in his first fight back, I just don't see it. So it's possible because they're both with the PBC. They could call it an eliminator, but I just don't think it's likely next. Number 8 is WBO champion Patrick Teixeira. Teixeira is lined up to make a mandatory defense of his title against Brian Castano next, so Hurd is not an option. Number 9 is Terrell Gausha, former world title challenger. Yeah, I guess this fight's possible because they're both with the PBC. I don't think Hurd would completely be against it. Gausha's a boxer, but I think Hurd would be confident that he could beat him, especially if it was some kind of an eliminator. So I think he could face Gausha, but Gausha's not really highly rated in any of the governing bodies, so I don't know how they could rule it as an eliminator, but I've seen stranger things happen, and it's an easily made fight right here, so maybe they could work out a deal and have this fight happen, so I guess it's possible. And then finally at number 10 is former world title challenger Erickson Lubin. Now, he's with the PBC. I think the fight is possible because of that. I think it's high risk for Hurd, to take a fight like that next, but I wouldn't completely rule it out because the thing I heard is that Lubin in his next fight is going to be competing for the WBC interim title. Now, if Hurd were to fight Lubin and beat him, then Hurd would be next in line to face Charlo, and Charlo's at the top of the division, so that might work out right there. So, again, I'm going to lean towards the less likely because I don't think he wants to face Lubin because Lubin is a bad matchup, in my opinion, for almost everybody. But I wouldn't completely rule it out, and I think it'd be a good fight, and it's easily made by the PBC, so it is possible. That's it for the top 10 with Jarrett Hurd at 154. Now, what do I think Jarrett Hurd's going to do next? I think he's just going to grind towards a world title. He could mandate himself next for the IBF or for the WBA title right now. Nobody's mandated him as a final eliminator, but I think he could face gold champion Michel Soro, possibly for an interim title, for the WBA interim title, or just for the mandatory number 1 spot, and the next fight would lead to a title shot. For the IBF, there's a couple lesser names on the list that he could face to become the IBF's next mandatory challenger. The only problem with that is he might have to wait because it looks like the next fight is going to be a mandatory IBF. So the champion would have the option of making an optional defense next, and then Hurd might be waiting around a year for that mandatory. So I think he just needs to look for the right fight in the right moment, the right thing to capitalize on, because Hurd is a tall order. He's a tough-ass fighter. He was the number 1 in the division, and guys were avoiding him even though he was the unified champ because he's such a tough matchup. Now that he doesn't have a belt, do you think a lot of these guys are going to sign on the dotted line so easily? Hurd's going to have to work for it. He needs to get out there, get himself a big-time eliminator, and go after a world title, and try to get back in that mix. I'd say make yourself a mandatory before the end of the year. If nobody in the top 10 wants to fight you, fight lesser opponents to become a mandatory and work yourself back in. And then in 2021, he's fighting for world titles again. So we'll see what happens. All right, guys, that's the what's next on my number 4 super welterweight in the world, Jarrett Hurd, the former unified champ. I hope you enjoyed it. True Boxing, you've been hit with the truth.